The internet has seen many disturbing videos over the years. Few have unsettled viewers quite like the footage recorded inside a small apartment in Florida. It wasn't a horror film, it was real. A man trapped inside a suitcase, struggling to breathe. And outside that suitcase, the person who claimed to love him was holding the camera. This is the story of Sarah Boone and Jorge Torres, a relationship fueled by alcohol, arguments, apologies, and a tragic night that would end in irreversible consequences. Sarah Boone was a divorced mother in her early 40s. By most accounts, she appeared ordinary. She had once been married, shared custody of her young son, and lived in a modest apartment. Friends described her as outgoing, sometimes unpredictable, someone who could be charming in one moment and emotionally volatile in the next. After her divorce, she began dating Jorge Torres. Jorge had his own troubled history. He struggled with alcohol and had previous run-ins with the law. Their relationship quickly became intense. Neighbors often reported loud arguments coming from the apartment. Police were called more than once for domestic disturbances. Both accused the other of being abusive. Both claimed to be victims. It was a toxic cycle: drinking, fighting, reconciling, repeating. Despite the chaos, they stayed together. According to Sarah, they loved each other. According to police records, their relationship was marked by instability. It was the kind of partnership where emotions ran high and logic often disappeared after a few drinks. On the night everything changed, Sarah later told investigators that they had been drinking heavily. Wine bottles were reportedly scattered around the apartment. What began as another evening of intoxicated bonding turned into something bizarre. At some point, they decided to play a game. Hide and seek. It sounds harmless, almost childish. Two adults, drinking, laughing, playing around inside their apartment. Sarah would later claim that it was Jorge's idea to climb into a suitcase as part of the game. Jorge folded himself into a large blue suitcase. It wasn't designed to hold a person. He had to bend his limbs tightly to fit. The zipper closed. The suitcase was sealed. What happened next would define the case. Instead of unzipping it moments later, instead of laughing and ending the game, Sarah picked up her phone and began recording. The video that investigators later recovered shows the suitcase lying on its side. From inside, Jorge's muffled voice can be heard. He says he can't breathe. He asks to be let out. His voice is strained, panicked. At one point, he calls her name. Sarah's voice responds from behind the camera. Calm. Detached. Eventually, the video ends. According to Sarah's later statement, she claimed she went upstairs and fell asleep, believing Jorge would be able to free himself. She described the entire situation as an accident. She insisted she never intended for him to die. The next morning, she said she found him unresponsive. Emergency services were called. But it was too late. When officers arrived at the scene, they discovered Jorge's body inside the suitcase. There were no signs that he had managed to escape or significantly reposition himself. The confined space, lack of airflow, and prolonged entrapment had led to his death. At first, Sarah told investigators that it was a tragic accident. She claimed they had both been drunk, that they were laughing, that she never imagined he wouldn't be able to get out. But as detectives examined the scene more closely, they found the videos on her phone. Those recordings told a different story. The tone in her voice did not match someone engaged in harmless play. As the interrogation continued, things only became stranger. Instead of focusing on Jorge's death, Sarah seemed determined to focus on herself. She repeatedly told detectives that all they had done that night was play hide and seek. She insisted she didn't know what happened. Over and over again, she said the same words, "I don't know what happened." But one detail stood out to investigators almost immediately. Before calling 911, Sarah had called her ex-husband. When detectives asked why she contacted him first instead of emergency services, she simply shrugged it off. She said she didn't know what else to do. According to her, it was actually her ex-husband who urged her to call the police. She also claimed that after discovering George unresponsive, she performed CPR for hours that morning. But even as she described these events, her tone felt scattered, rambling, detached. And then, something else became clear during the interrogation. Sarah was already positioning herself as the victim. She told detectives she was afraid for her life, not because of what had happened inside the apartment, but because she feared George's family. She claimed they hated her. She said they called her names. She insisted they would never believe this was accidental. According to Sarah, they were going to kill her for what happened. She looked at homicide detectives and said, "I just want you guys to know, I'm afraid for my life." A man had just died, and she was asking for protection. She repeatedly asked officers when they were going to notify George's family. She wanted to know if it would be today or tomorrow. When detectives explained that legally they had to notify them immediately, Sarah ran her hands through her hair in visible frustration, almost as if the timing was an inconvenience. She kept asking, "What are you going to tell them? What are you going to say is the cause of death?" It wasn't grief driving the questions. It sounded like fear of losing control over the narrative. She emphasized again and again that George's family would think she killed him, that they would never accept it as an accident, that she needed to go into hiding because they lived nearby. She painted herself as isolated, her parents deceased, her grandparents gone, no one to stay with. She told detectives she had nobody. Then she shifted to criticizing George's ex-wife. She claimed the ex-wife kept George from seeing his children. She described her as evil. But later in the same interrogation, she contradicted herself by stating George spoke to his daughter every single night, including the night he died. The inconsistencies were piling up. At one point, Sarah asked detectives what they knew so far, almost as if she were part of the investigation team. Then she asked a question that chilled many viewers once the footage became public. She casually asked why George's face had turned purple. Detectives explained that lack of oxygen causes discoloration. That suffocation leads to immense physical distress, that it is not a painless process. Sarah listened as if they were discussing general biology. No visible horror, no visible devastation, just quiet acknowledgement. She even asked if she should wait outside the crime scene and whether all necessary personnel had arrived, logistical questions that felt disturbingly procedural. Throughout the interrogation, Sarah also praised herself. She described George as a volcano who was always on the verge of erupting. She claimed she was the one who helped him, the one who carried his emotional burdens, the one who understood him better than anyone. She said she knew George better than he knew himself. She said she took care of him, that she helped fix him, that even by being in that interrogation room, she was still trying to help him. Detectives attempted to offer her a psychological opening. They suggested perhaps things had become too much. Perhaps she had snapped after enduring abuse. She refused. "I never stopped caring," she said. She insisted it wasn't intentional. But then came the turning point. Detectives asked her whether she remembered taking any videos that night. She said no. Maybe she took a picture of the dog, she suggested, but no videos. Detectives informed her they had found something on her phone. They asked again if she was sure she didn't remember recording anything. She denied it. Then they told her they were going to show her what they found. Before the video even began playing, Sarah appeared uneasy. She asked if it was long. She said she didn't know how much more she could take. When the footage started, her demeanor shifted instantly. She realized what it was. The video of George trapped inside the suitcase. His voice pleading, her voice responding. She asked not to watch it. She said it was making her sick. But detectives let it play. There were actually two videos. In them, George could be heard struggling, saying he couldn't breathe, calling her name. Sarah could be heard speaking back, not in panic, not in urgency, but in anger. When confronted, she insisted it wasn't malicious. She even stood up and pointed at the screen, claiming there was a gap in the zipper where he could have escaped. Detectives saw no such opening. They asked her why, if there was space to get out, George was pushing against the suitcase and begging for air. She had no clear answer. Instead, she said she had been drunk, that she didn't remember recording the videos. This contradicted her earlier statements, where she insisted she liked to stay in control and didn't get overly intoxicated. Now, intoxication became her explanation. When detectives highlighted the inconsistencies, she deflected. She implied they were putting words in her mouth, that they were trying to frame her narrative. But the video spoke louder than her words. The following day, February 25th, 2020, Sarah Boone was arrested and charged with second-degree murder in the death of Jorge Torres. Even during transport to jail, her behavior stunned many. She reportedly requested a spacious cell. She said she suffered panic attacks in small spaces. The irony was not lost on anyone. As the legal process unfolded, delays slowed everything down. The pandemic complicated court proceedings. Over the next 2 years, Sarah cycled through multiple attorneys. Letters she wrote from jail revealed deep frustration that her lawyers weren't communicating enough. The trial would determine legal guilt, but for many who watched the footage, the emotional verdict had already formed. And it all started with a suitcase and a decision not to unzip it.